Hello, and welcome to the latest in this series of vlogs by Revo, looking at what we have learned from the last 12 months and what we expect to be different over the coming 12 months. Today, we're going to be looking at this from a retailer's perspective. I'm Neil Hockin, a director of Revo and Lunson Mitchenall, and I'm delighted to welcome Neil Hinds, property director of F. Hinds Jewellers. F. Hinds have 115 branches across the UK and employ 1,000 people. The company was established in 1856, and the Hinds family have been involved with the management throughout its history. In 1997, Hinds were ahead of the industry by launching a transactional website and have traded both online and in-store since. Neil, thank you very much for joining us today. Let's kick off straight away. As I said in my intro, Neil, F. Hinds were an early adopter of online retail. Some commentators think the move to online trade will be permanent. What's your view?
Some elements of online are definitely permanent changes and some not so. It depends a little bit on the product that you're selling or the service. For example, branded items are probably more likely to become a permanent move as the consumer knows what they're buying in terms of quality and fashion. Some services, e.g. the travel industry, where hotels and flights become relatively easy to book online, almost certainly will stay permanent changes. Being a non-essential retailer, we have traded online only during the lockdown periods and we've been up about 100%. But to put that into perspective, it's a very small proportion of our overall turnover. We're a bricks and mortar retailer predominantly, and the pandemic has certainly caused us to reconsider our policy of being more proactive engagement with the online consumer, particularly via social media, which we think has got a huge potential.
And picking up on your comment on being a predominantly bricks and mortar retailer, do you think having a broad portfolio of stores will help you to drive online retail sales?
It'll give consumers confidence, particularly when they know that if they've got a problem with an item that they bought online, they can take it back to one of our branches and they know we're still going to be there. We haven't gone from the internet overnight with all their money, etc. So I think overall, I think the two will work hand in hand very well and are already doing so. We think there's a definite synergy between the two. And initially we were uncertain and we were also concerned that staff would regard the internet as a threat. But this has not been the case, as stories of customers researching on websites and arriving with a piece of paper saying, I want one of these, has changed their perception, and they now regard the website as a marketing and sales assistant almost.
It sounds like you've managed to meld the two both together very well and like a truly omni-channel experience. Looking back over the last 12 months, particular with government help such as rates, furlough and bounce back loans, do you feel there's been enough support and what more could have been done to help UK retailers?
I think there has been a lot of support for retailers, and without it, undoubtedly many businesses would not have survived, and almost no retailers. Losing 7 or 8 months worth of turnover in a year would be fairly catastrophic for just about any business. Overall, we found the assistance to be good. The rates holiday furlough, several grants, but the difficulty in following the rules on the grants has been particularly tricky in relation to the EU limits on state aid. Contradiction, moving the goalposts, misinformation, deadlines for claims, all of those have no doubt inevitably caused some retailers to miss some of the grants, and I suspect that we're included in that as well.
Perhaps one of the the biggest pieces of aid that the government's given hasn't come directly from them, but it's the moratorium on enforcing rent collection. This will have to come to an end at some point. What do you think will happen then?
We're pretty unsure of what should happen, and perhaps the parties might be required to agree a repayment plan, but I imagine that could probably be unworkable. In a single word, when the end of the moratorium occurs, there will be a lot of carnage on the high street. Some landlords have been very aggressive. Some of them have gone under, and the more financially secure will no doubt want to exact their revenge on some tenants who they see as being particularly difficult. Landlords have the morally, legally correct position as tenants entered into lease contract freely, but there's no legal justification not to pay, even with the pandemic in our midst.
Thank you, Neil. I tend to agree with you. And my understanding is about £8 billion of unpaid rent at the moment. And I agree with you entirely, but we need government guidance on how that should be paid back rather than just open season when the moratorium comes to an end. That £8 billion has undoubtedly put a lot of pressure on commercial landlords. And I was wondering whether you could comment on how you feel relationships with landlords and tenants, and whether they've improved or deteriorated over the last 12 months.
One word, mixed. As an overall generalisation, I think they're worse than they were before. Particularly, some landlords have been quite aggressive from as early as April last year. We wrote to all of our landlords then and managing agents proposing that we share the pain, and we got very little engagement, some no response whatsoever, some flat no, and some, to be fair, were prepared to engage from an early time and try to find a mutually acceptable solution, even if it's not ideal from either party's point of view. It's probably a good solution.
And without being too specific, do you have any good and bad examples of the types of deal landlords have been prepared to offer you?
Some have offered nothing at all and basically say, no, we're going to wait and get it all back when we can. And they haven't been prepared to entertain anything at all. Some have offered deferment, but that doesn't really help a retailer as it pushes the problem to a later period in the year or next year. Some landlords have been prepared to give something for nothing, 50% rent waiver or rent free, adding equal length of term to the end of the lease to compensate them for the income they lost.
Looking forward perhaps now, I wonder whether your view on lease structure has changed. Specifically, are you looking at longer or shorter leases? Are you considering turnover rents? Do you need further break clauses? Are you prepared to offer landlords flexibility?
Our policy has not really changed in the last 10 years. It's more a case of tweaking it. We've always tried to set up our lease structures for new units to protect against the pain, but also share the spoils of the landlord when it's better times.
I suppose it's a hard question for the landlord community to answer, but some of it lies probably in the way that retail property is currently valued. And perhaps that's something that needs an overhaul as well. On the subject of overhauls, the majority of my work is on behalf of landlord clients, and we have a slightly cynical view of the Landlord and Tenant Act 1954 Part 2 as amended to give it its full name. From a retailer's perspective, do you understand why landlords might want greater control at lease renewal?
I do understand why they want it, but I don't agree that they should have it. Retailers put a massive investment into setting up a new branch, not just the shop fit, but there's the cost of stock, staff, training, management time, and sometimes it takes many years to recoup their investment.
From our perspective, from the landlord side, again, Neil, I think the L&T Act needs to be looked at. When it was originally introduced, it was to protect moms and pops retailers, and I think we now live in a far more commercial world. And as investment criteria change, I think landlords will increasingly push to have leases outside the L&T Act. I think it'll come down to the negotiating stance of the two parties and how desperate they are to deal in an individual location. But that's something that I think we'll see more and more of in the future. How are your plans for reopening progressing?
We're very much on track. In the first lockdown, we had lots of information that came in late from government and guidance. And last June was a bit of a last-minute rush as retailers had to try and guess what some of the requirements would be. But it's better to over-provide rather than under-provide, and we've certainly bought more than we probably needed, or certainly at that time. Now we've had practice. This is the third time we've gone back again after a sustained period of inactivity. And similar to previous lockdown endings, guidance this time has not really been needed, as most precautions are still in place and fairly well organised.
And do you think you have the right stock available, and how has the lockdown had an impact on your supply chain?
Yes, we are fairly certain we've got the right stock because we're fortunate not to be a seasonal business as some retailers such as the fashion industry are. Looking
now perhaps at consumers, CACI research for Revo shows that 74% of consumers' finances have improved or at least stayed the same as a result of a pandemic. And there's a net increase in disposable income across all Acorn groups. How do you think consumers will react to post-COVID shopping, and how long before sales return to pre-COVID levels?
Undoubtedly, there's pent-up demand, and certainly it will be relatively busy for the first 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks initially. We found at the end of the first lockdown that demand was strong and carried on throughout the summer and autumn. We think demand will continue due to the higher savings. Smaller centres such as market towns and open air centres have been relatively buoyant during the period between the lockdowns, as people have tended to shop locally.
And if you're correct with your assumption, and I don't disagree that footfall could be down, do you think retailers will be forced into promotions to increase conversion rates?
Yeah, undoubtedly, footfall will take a while to recover, and some centres may never recover without substantial changes to them. Our experience after the first lockdown was that footfall, although footfall was down, even in the smaller local centres, it was counterbalanced by an average sale price being up, but not enough to compensate for the turnover drops in some of the larger centres. So overall, we're a bit down.
And as a business, how do you balance the need to drive turnover and move stock against maintaining margins?
We've just done the initially cash generation. Most will need to generate cash to start paying their bills, including rent. There'll be opportunities to buy some product at keener prices from manufacturers, as their businesses will also need to generate cash. You may benefit from picking up cancelled orders, work together, identifying new areas of demand.
Obviously, but the move to online is very important for your business. You were very early adopters and now seem to me to be very multi-channel. Are you still comfortable investing in store refits, or do you get stronger returns for investing in your online platform?
We're very absolutely committed to the store in the high street. We're predominantly a bricks and mortar retailer, and if we don't invest in our stores, our business will suffer. Moving
on a bit now, sort of more geopolitical possibly. How has Brexit impacted on your distribution model? Do you see this as a forgotten issue that might haunt the industry in the post-lockdown world?
Relatively, I think it's been forgotten as a negative effect. Brexit's really been lost in the more disabling pandemic effect, which has been so much more disruptive to trade and life generally, and looks set to continue for some time.
We've seen a lot of retail and leisure operators use CVAs as a means to renegotiate lease terms. Is this process being abused at the expense of commercial landlords? Do you feel it unfairly penalises successful retailers like yourselves?
You'd be pleased to know that although there are not many topics where we're on the landlord side, this is in fact one. I think it's morally wrong. It may be a legitimate process to have voluntary arrangements and pre-packs, and it might give a lifeline to the distressed retailer, but landlords suffer without having much or any influence on the outcome, even if one of the lucky ones where tenant wants to keep the shop open, albeit at much reduced rent.
I couldn't agree about that point more, and it'll be interesting to see when some of the retailers who CVA'd over the last 12 months, whether they do survive or resort to a further CVA or other mechanism to try and change the situation. It doesn't seem to me to solve all of a retailer's woes. Those sit more within their existing businesses and how they're funded. So I'm delighted we agree on that piece, Neil. Finally, what lessons have you learned from managing your portfolio for the last 12 months? And what could the landlord community do better when looking to improve relationships with their tenants?
Probably the single most important thing is communication, both ways. For example, with the pandemic and shopping centres being shut, not many retailers have received information from the managing agents or landlords to tell them of the savings that have been made during the lockdown, and it'd be helpful if they actually provided us with credits as well, where the money's that's been provided isn't actually being used. Immediate threats to all your tenants only encourages animosity and reduces the likelihood of amicable agreement or compromise being found. The landlord and tenant's business is intrinsically linked to each other, and usually in an adversarial capacity. It's better to talk.
That's great, Neil. Thank you so much for speaking so openly and candidly with us today. There's lessons for all of the retail property community to learn from what you've had to tell us. It's great now that stores are reopened, and hopefully trade is going exceptionally well for you and for other retailers who are part of the Revo community. I hope you found this vlog interesting, and watch out for more Revo content, which we'll be posting through our normal channel shortly.